Imagine being 12, young, and barely tall enough to see over the witness stand, then pulling up to court and clapping back at a $10 million fraud case like it's light work. They had lawyers. He had vibes, Google, and trauma. And guess what? That boy cooked. It was Friday in the South Bronx, the kind of sticky summer payday when the sidewalks smell like hot pretzels and dreams, and the neighborhood hums with energy. Buses hissed at every corner, music thumped from passing cars, and people swarmed bodegas like bees to honey. The air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. But 12-year-old Kian didn't notice any of that. He was sitting on a busted milk crate outside Johnny's Pawn and Loan, his legs swinging, his backpack pressed against his chest like a shield. His mom, Shonda, was inside cashing her check. Another 2-week hustle turned into just enough to pay the light bill, the rent, and maybe sneak a pizza night if nobody asked for extras. Kian peeked through the glass door, watching her argue with the clerk. She always did. Not because she was difficult, but because she hated being shortchanged, again. She looked tired. Not just worked a double shift, tired. Life tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones and whispers that you ain't never gonna catch up. She wore her faded red work polo from the city housing office and the same black sneakers she bought 3 birthdays ago. But still, she stood proud. There was something in the way Shonda carried herself, like she refused to be broken, even when the world kept handing her reasons. Kian smiled. To him, his mom was part superhero, part magician. She could stretch $50 like it was $500. She could make dinner from 3 things in the fridge and a prayer. She could walk into a room and make everybody shut up with just one look. The door jingled as she stepped out, check in hand, still muttering under her breath about the $3 processing fee. Kian hopped up, slinging his bag over his shoulder. You get it? He asked. Shonda rolled her eyes. Barely. And don't let me catch you ever in that place trying to pawn your sneakers or some nonsense, you hear me? Kian grinned. Yes, ma'am. They didn't make it 10 steps before everything went sideways. 2 black SUVs with tinted windows rolled up to the curb like ghosts. No screeching tires, no warning. Just silence, then movement. Doors flew open. Men in dark jackets, wearing tactical vests and earpieces, stormed out like a SWAT movie playing in real life. Shonda James, one of them shouted. Hands where we can see them. Time slowed. Kian froze. His mom instinctively stepped in front of him. Her eyes darted left and right, searching for a camera crew or some punchline. But this was real. Wow, what is this? She stammered. What's going on? You're under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, and embezzlement tied to a $10 million federal housing scheme. One agent barked as another grabbed her arm and spun her around. You have the right to remain silent. What? Kian shouted. No, wait. That's not true. She didn't. He lunged toward them, instinctively reaching for his mom. A third agent blocked him hard with a forearm. Back up, kid. Now. Kian stumbled back onto the sidewalk, his palms scraping the pavement. His breath caught in his throat as he watched his mother being handcuffed, her face a blend of fury, fear, and utter disbelief. Kian, she screamed over her shoulder. Call Auntie Renee. Stay calm, baby, stay calm. Mom, he yelled, tears springing into his eyes. Neighbors started peeking from stoops. A few people pulled out their phones. But nobody stepped in. Not when the feds show up. That's how it goes in places like this. People watch, but they don't interfere. Kian could feel his heartbeat in his ears, deafening and chaotic. The agent shoved Shonda into the back of the SUV like she was some kind of criminal. Like she was dangerous. Like she wasn't just his mom. The woman who made pancakes with chocolate chips on his birthday and danced to Old Mary J. Blige tracks when cleaning the kitchen. The door slammed shut. The SUV sped off. And just like that, she was gone. Kian stood in the middle of the sidewalk, people walking around him like he didn't exist, like he wasn't watching his whole world collapse. He stared at the empty curb where the SUVs had been, his chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. Something inside him cracked, but not the part that makes a boy cry. The part that makes a boy decide. The night after Shonda was arrested, Kian sat on the edge of a thin cot in a dimly lit room that wasn't his. The walls were plain beige. The sheets smelled like bleach. A cracked window rattled with every gust of wind, and the ceiling fan above him creaked like it might fall at any second. This was a foster home, Temporary, they said. But to Kian, it felt like exile. Nobody told him much. Not the social worker who picked him up from the precinct. Not the tired woman who ran the foster house and called him sweetie like she didn't know his name. The only thing he knew for sure was that his mom wasn't coming home tonight. Or tomorrow. Or maybe ever. The next morning, they drove past their old building. The yellow eviction sticker slapped across their front door burned itself into Kian's memory like a curse. He watched their apartment through the back window of the social worker's car, as if staring hard enough might somehow unlock the door and bring her back. Inside that apartment were their family photos. His spelling bee medals. His mother's favorite green mug. Gone. All of it. Just like that. 3 days later, Kian sat in a cold, sterile family courtroom waiting to speak to someone, anyone, about his mom's case. He clutched a worn manila envelope holding the last letter she wrote to him, passed through a corrections officer. Across the room sat her public defender, a sweaty, overworked man named Clarkson, who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His tie was crooked, his eyes bloodshot. Kian stood and walked toward him. "Excuse me, Mr. Clarkson?" Kian asked, his voice quiet but firm. "Have you talked to my mom?" Clarkson avoided eye contact. "We're reviewing things," he muttered. "It's complicated." "She didn't do it," Kian said. "I know she didn't." Clarkson gave him a look that was equal parts pity and fatigue. "Sometimes people get caught up in things they don't understand. It's out of my hands now." Before Kian could press further, Clarkson's phone buzzed. He checked the screen, muttered something under his breath, then stood and hurried out of the courtroom. That was the last time Kian saw him. 2 days later, Kian snuck into the public records room at the courthouse during visiting hours, pretending he was there with another family. There, tucked between stacks of stale folders, he overheard a conversation he wasn't supposed to hear. 2 assistant prosecutors whispering near a copier. Rosenthal made the call himself. One of them said, laughing under his breath. Told Clarkson to step away or risk getting exposed for that DUI last year. "Man, that case is radioactive," the other muttered. "Nobody's touching it. They're just gonna drown her in motions and red tape." Classic playbook. Kian's chest went cold. Rosenthal. District Attorney Jeremiah Rosenthal. Slick, powerful, and politically bulletproof. The kind of man who smiled for cameras and stepped on people behind closed doors. He was running for Senate next year. He needed a win, a big one. And his mom? She was just the perfect pawn in a game way bigger than she ever imagined. Kian backed away slowly, slipping out of the room like a ghost. That night, he sat on the stoop outside the Foster house under the dim buzz of a street lamp. His fists clenched. His mind was spinning. His mom had once told him, "Don't ever wait for someone to come save you." Most people barely saving themselves. He never really understood what she meant, until now. He looked up at the stars, faint and flickering through the city haze, and made a silent vow. "If I didn't do something, my mom would die in prison for something she didn't do." She was no thief. She didn't know about any millions. She just worked hard, kept her head down, and trusted the wrong people. That wasn't a crime. It was survival. And now the system that was supposed to protect her was lining up to bury her alive. Kian pulled the manila envelope from his backpack again and opened her letter. At the bottom, in the slanted handwriting he knew by heart, she'd scribbled, "Keep your head up, baby. I'll be home soon. Love, Mom." He folded it carefully, then stood, his heart pounding. "I may not be a lawyer," he whispered to himself, "but I'm about to learn fast." And just like that, the fire was lit. The basement of the group home was cold, musty, and smelled like wet concrete. The overhead light flickered every few minutes like it was keeping time with Kian's racing thoughts. Down there, past the broken ping-pong table and boxes of forgotten donations, sat a crooked bookshelf sagging in the middle like it had given up on itself. That's where he found it. Fundamentals of Housing Law, revised 1983 edition. Thick, dusty, and probably older than him. But when Kian opened the cover and saw the table of contents, tenant rights, public housing codes, fraud and misrepresentation, his heart started thudding. It felt like a sign. No, it was a sign. For the next several nights, while the other kids played video games or slept with earbuds in, Kian sat cross-legged on the basement floor, flipping pages with one hand and scribbling notes into a marble notebook with the other. He didn't fully understand everything at first. Words like injunctive relief and statutory negligence tangled his brain, but he learned to break it down, piece by piece. He studied like his mother's life depended on it. Because it did. 2 weeks later, Kian started sneaking into the Bronx County Courthouse, a building that looked like something out of an old detective movie. Tall pillars, echoing hallways, and security guards who didn't ask too many questions if you kept your head down. He would slip into the back of the courtroom and slide into a bench, quiet as shadow, sitting through hours of hearings. He watched how the lawyers walked, how they spoke, how they presented evidence like it was theater. He memorized how objections were raised, how witnesses were cross-examined. No one noticed the kid in the oversized hoodie with the legal pad balanced on his knees. He became a ghost, a student of war in a place where battles were fought in suits and with statutes. Back in the group home, Kian built his case. Not just with facts, but with fire. He copied housing codes from the Public Records Office by hand. Using a dull pencil, he sharpened with a nail file. He highlighted old precedents where poor tenants had been wrongfully accused. He even drafted a statement titled, "People versus Power, the Misuse of Public Funds and the Manipulation of Innocence." It wasn't just legal prep. It was a declaration. Then came the day. He stood outside the courthouse in his only collared shirt, borrowed from the foster home director's teenage son, and black slacks 2 inches too short at the ankle. His backpack hung heavy with paper, sweat, and hope. Inside, courtroom 4B buzzed with lawyers flipping through files, a bailiff yawning behind the rail, and the judge, Honorable Eleanor Whitaker, reviewing the morning docket. Shonda's case was called. She was led in wearing a beige jumpsuit, her eyes heavy but searching the room. When she saw Kian sitting at the defendant's table instead of a lawyer, her mouth dropped open. Before anyone could object, Kian stood. "Your Honor," he said, voice cracking but steady. "I'm requesting to represent my mother as next of kin with power of attorney." The room froze. There was a beat of stunned silence, followed by a wave of laughter from the gallery. Even the stenographer smirked. The prosecutor chuckled, leaning back with crossed arms, whispering something under his breath about kids lost his mind. Judge Whitaker raised one brow. "Son, you're how old?" "Almost 13, ma'am." "You realize this is a federal fraud case? $10 million at stake." "Yes, Your Honor. I'm aware. But no lawyer will take her case. Not because she's guilty, but because it's inconvenient. I may not have a degree, but I have time. And I've used it." He pulled a thick folder from his backpack and slid it across the table. Inside, housing code violations, photocopied lease agreements, handwritten statutes, affidavits he drafted himself. The courtroom went quiet. The judge flipped through the papers slowly. Her expression shifted from amused to curious to something that looked a lot like respect. "You prepared this?" "Yes, ma'am. I've been sitting in this courtroom every Thursday for 3 weeks. I've read the Housing Code book from 1983. I've filed a motion to appoint myself temporary counsel under emergency family law. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing." She leaned back, tapping her pen against her chin. "Mr. Prosecutor," she said without looking up, "any objections?" The prosecutor scoffed. "Your Honor, this is outrageous." She raised a hand to silence him. Then, after a long pause, she looked directly at Kian. "This isn't normal. This isn't advisable. But I'm not sure anything about this case is. I'll allow a preliminary hearing, just to see what this young man thinks he can do." The courtroom gasped. Kian sat back, heart pounding like a bass drum in his chest. He wasn't a lawyer. Not yet. But the door was open, and he had just stepped through it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Kian stood behind the defendant's table, papers trembling slightly in his hands. Not because he was scared. He had long passed fear, but because he could feel every eye in the courtroom pressing into his back like invisible knives. This was no longer a novelty. No longer, "Look at the brave little boy trying to help his mama." This was war. His mother, Shonda, sat beside him in her beige jumpsuit, her wrist shackled lightly to the chair. She glanced at him with soft, tear-glossed eyes, equal parts terrified and proud. Across the aisle, the state's table was packed with polished suits and sharpened smiles. At the center of it all was D.A. Jeremiah Rosenthal, flawless hair, perfect posture, and a grin made for press conferences. His eyes radiated smugness, like he'd already written the victory speech. But today, Kian had come to flip the script. He stepped forward, took a breath, and began his opening statement. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the court, I am not a lawyer. I don't have a degree, I've never been to college, and I don't own a briefcase. But I do know the truth. And the truth doesn't need a suit or a title to speak. The courtroom leaned in. My mother is accused of stealing $10 million. But the real theft in this case isn't money. It's time. Time stolen from honest people by corrupt systems. Time stolen from my mother, who trusted the very institutions that are now trying to crush her. And it's not just her. This goes deeper than one woman. Murmurs fluttered through the gallery. The judge tapped her gavel lightly. Kian continued. The evidence they're using against my mother was obtained without a signed warrant. The chain of custody documents for the financial files? Missing. And the key witness? His statement was altered. Pages replaced between the original and the copy submitted to the court. He paused, then locked eyes with Rosenthal. Either the prosecution is sloppy, or they're hiding something. A sharp exhale slipped from Rosenthal's nose, but he said nothing. Not yet. Kian flipped through his binder, pulling out photocopied forms, highlighting circles, and handwritten annotations. This here is a procurement document from the city's Housing and Development Office. It shows a $3 million grant approved under Section 9C of the Municipal Code, signed by a supervisor who doesn't exist. The approval stamp? Forged. He turned to the judge. That supervisor's name doesn't appear on any payroll record, any employee log, or any internal email. But the paperwork traces back to accounts connected to Rosenthal's former campaign finance director, now a contractor managing low-income housing repairs. The courtroom exploded in murmurs again. Rosenthal stood, slow and theatrical. Objection, Your Honor. This is wild conspiracy theory. The boy is clearly out of his depth. The judge raised her hand. Sustained for tone, Mr. Rosenthal. But the documents are now part of the record. Continue, Mr. James. Kian raised his chin. Thank you, Your Honor. Rosenthal smiled bitterly and turned to Kian. You think watching Law and Order makes you a lawyer? The gallery chuckled. Even the court clerk smirked. But Kian didn't flinch. He took a step closer, calm as ever, and replied. No, sir. But reading your public record makes you a criminal. Dead silence. The courtroom froze. You could hear the buzz of the lights, the faint creak of the judge's chair as she shifted her weight. Rosenthal blinked. The judge cleared her throat, fighting back what looked suspiciously like a smile. Let's remember courtroom decorum, Mr. James, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Kian gave a respectful nod. After the session, Rosenthal stormed out of the courtroom without another word, his team scrambling to keep up. Reporters lingered near the back doors, eyes wide, hands on their phones, waiting for an angle. Kian stayed behind, quietly packing up his papers. His mom leaned in, whispering, Cool. How did you even find all that? He smiled softly. The basement library at the group home had a book on housing law. And the city clerk's records are still public, if you know where to look. They were counting on us not looking. She shook her head, eyes full of disbelief and pride. You're not even 13 yet. He slid the last paper into his folder and said quietly, That just means I've got more time to fight. The smell of stale disinfectant hit Kian the moment he stepped into the nursing home lobby. The buzz of old fluorescent lights overhead. The tired shuffle of nurses in scrubs. He looked out of place, borrowed button-up shirt 2 sizes too big, holding a notebook gripped so tight it was wrinkled like a sponge. He had tracked down Earl Whitman, a former city clerk who'd worked for the Department of Housing for over 30 years. The man had disappeared from public life after taking early retirement during the housing scandal's peak. Most people thought he'd died. But Kian, with the relentlessness only desperation could produce, had combed through city payroll logs, Medicaid registries, and state nursing home rosters until he found him. Earl was waiting in a wheelchair, by the window, dressed in a thin hospital gown and covered in a plaid blanket. His eyes were sharp, despite the oxygen tubes, and when Kian introduced himself, Earl flinched, not from surprise, but fear. I shouldn't be talking to you, Earl said, voice papery and low. They still have eyes everywhere. I'm not asking for a statement, Kian replied gently, pulling up a chair. I just need the truth. You don't even have to sign anything. There was a pause. A long one. Then Earl nodded toward the window. You see that bench out there? That's where your mama used to eat lunch. Every day, like clockwork. And every day, Someone else was signing off paperwork in her name. Big checks, HUD contracts, renovation grants that never made it to the buildings they were meant for. Kian's heart began to pound. You saw the signatures? I logged them. It was my job. I just didn't know until later what they were doing. When I found out, I tried to report it. They told me to take my pension and shut the hell up. Who are they? Earl looked around, lowered his voice. Start with that contractor. Roland Dorsey. He was the puppeteer. Your mama was the string. It was the confirmation Kian needed, but Earl's hands started shaking, and he reached for his oxygen mask. Don't come back, Earl wheezed. You poke this beast too much, it bites. Back in court 2 days later, Kian stood facing a man in a $1,000 suit. Leonard Fisk, Dorsey's personal accountant. Fisk adjusted his cufflinks, smirking like he was untouchable. Kian didn't flinch. He moved slowly, deliberately, across the courtroom, each step echoing. He placed a manila folder on the evidence table and opened it. Mr. Fisk, could you confirm the signature on this housing grant application? That would be Shonda Ellis's. Yes, Fisk answered confidently. Kian nodded. Now, on this payroll ledger from your office, he flipped to the next sheet. Can you confirm who authorized the release of funds for that same project? Fisk hesitated. That would be Mr. Dorsey. So let me get this straight, Kian said, locking eyes with the jury. My mother signed for the grant, but had no access to the money. The release was made by Dorsey's office. Yet she's the one sitting in a cell accused of masterminding the fraud. Fisk looked uncomfortable. The courtroom stirred. You're twisting things, son. No, sir, Kian said, voice steady. I'm just reading them. A whisper of laughter rippled from the gallery. Even the judge leaned forward. That's when Rosenthal, the smug DA in his custom gray suit, stood to object, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted. Recess was called. Kian stepped outside to breathe, crossing the street toward a sandwich shop. But he never made it. A black van idled by the curb. Before he could react, 2 masked men jumped out. No words. Just movement. Fast, brutal. One reached for his arm, the other blocked the sidewalk. Instinct kicked in. Kian dropped his backpack and sprinted down the alley. He heard footsteps pounding behind him. He dove between dumpsters, scaled a rusty gate, nearly slipping. Sirens wailed in the distance, distant, uncaring. By the time he ducked into a laundromat and crouched behind a row of dryers, heart thudding like a drum, the van had disappeared. His hands were scraped, his shirt torn, but he was alive. He sat on the floor, chest heaving, staring at the broken zipper on his backpack and the law textbook peeking out from inside. His voice, trembling but fierce, whispered, "This isn't about law anymore. This is about survival." Kian stepped into the courtroom limping, the swelling in his left eye beginning to purple. His blazer was wrinkled from the night before, and the cut on his cheek hadn't stopped stinging since he cleaned it in a gas station bathroom. But he kept walking, chin up, fists tight, because today, the truth had to matter. The courtroom murmured as soon as people saw him. He looked like he'd come out of a car crash. Even Judge Martinez leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. "Mr. Kingsley," the judge said slowly, adjusting his glasses. "Rough night." Kian didn't flinch. "Just part of the process, Your Honor." A chuckle rolled through the crowd, but Judge Martinez didn't laugh. He banged his gavel once. "Let's get back on record. Counsel, call your next witness." Before anyone could move, a bailiff stepped forward and handed a sealed envelope to the judge. "Found this on the bench, sir. No return address." Judge Martinez frowned, opened the envelope, and pulled out several photocopies clipped together, along with a single handwritten note. His eyebrows lifted as he read. A silence fell so thick you could hear people holding their breath. "What is it?" the prosecutor asked, clearly agitated. Judge Martinez didn't answer right away. He flipped through the papers, then cleared his throat. "This is an unsigned confession, accompanied by forged financial documents implicating city contractor Wesley Dalton in an elaborate embezzlement scheme. The same scheme your mother, Mr. Kingsley, is accused of participating in." Kian took a cautious step forward. "Can it be admitted?" The judge shook his head. "Not without a witness to authenticate the documents. It's anonymous, and that's assuming it's not fabricated." The air left Kian's lungs like a balloon popped with a knife. For a moment, he just stood there, helpless again. Every night studying those law books in the flickering basement light, every courthouse he snuck into, Every tear-soaked page of his mother's indictment. All of it threatened to mean nothing. Then came the voice. "I'll testify." Everyone turned. From the defendant's seat, Kian's mother, Simone Kingsley, rose slowly. Her hands trembled. Her voice cracked. But her eyes, those weary, defiant eyes, were steady. "I'll testify." Judge Martinez motioned for her to approach the stand. The courtroom watched in eerie silence as she was sworn in. Kian couldn't speak, could barely breathe. She took a deep breath. "They made me sign papers I didn't understand," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Said it was for my promotion. Said it would protect me. I thought I was finally moving up, after all these years cleaning government buildings like I didn't exist. I didn't know it was tied to money. Millions. They never told me that." Gasps echoed. Kian's eyes welled, but he held them back. The judge, stone-faced, nodded once. The prosecutor jumped up. "So you admit to signing the documents?" "I admit to being stupid," she said bluntly. "But not a criminal. I never saw a dollar. Never knew what I was a part of." The DA turned to the judge. "That's still a confession, Your Honor." And that's when Kian stood up, loud and clear. "Only if we punish ignorance with incarceration. Only if we punish trust." He stepped forward, slow but burning. "My mom didn't commit fraud. She was used. She was poor, single, and barely surviving. And she believed the people who paid her paycheck. If being poor and trusting the wrong people makes you a criminal, then half the city should be in jail." The room fell into stunned silence. Even the prosecutor had nothing to say. Judge Martinez leaned back, eyes studying Kian like he was seeing him for the first time. "You're saying she was coerced?" "She was set up," Kian replied. "Used as a puppet to funnel money through a system designed to never get caught. Until now." The judge didn't speak. For a long moment, he just sat there, the gavel untouched, his lips pressed into a line. Then he rose. "I'll need time to review these new claims," he said. "Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning." He banged the gavel. Kian's mother clutched his hand as he walked back to her, whispering, "You're not just my son. You're my miracle." But Kian wasn't smiling. He looked toward the prosecutor's table and the cold glare of DA Rosenthal. Because now, Kian understood. He was playing a game where the rules changed in the shadows, and the people who made them weren't going down without a war. And tomorrow, the real battle would begin. The courtroom felt like a powder keg. One wrong word, one twitch, and the whole thing would explode. DA Rosenthal stood, trying to mask his panic behind a practiced frown. "Your Honor," he said sharply, "this trial has become a circus. I'm requesting a mistrial. Grounds: witness tampering, undocumented evidence, and a defendant being represented by a teenage boy with no law degree." Kian didn't flinch. He was bruised, still stiff from the kidnapping attempt 2 nights ago, but his eyes never wavered. He stood up before the judge could respond. "With respect, Your Honor," Kian said, his voice calm but heavy with emotion. "If this is a circus, it's because corruption made it one. Not me." The judge lifted a hand, silencing both sides. His eyes flicked to Kian, part wary, part intrigued. "Proceed, Mr. Kian," he said, hesitating over the informal title, "but be brief." Kian walked to the center of the courtroom. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice, when it came, was steady, powerful. "I don't have a legal team. I don't have years of courtroom experience. I don't even have a suit that fits." He tugged gently at his oversized blazer, borrowed from a church donation box. "But I have something that I don't think many people in this room do," he said, locking eyes with Rosenthal. "I have the truth." The room quieted. No papers shuffled. No phones buzzed. Even the ceiling fan seemed to pause. "My mom cleaned floors in the same buildings you stole money from," Kian continued, turning to face the jury. "She didn't take millions. She took second shifts, late nights, blisters. She believed in the system. She believed that if she worked hard enough, she'd be left alone." He turned back to the judge. "She trusted a city contractor who used her name to funnel dirty money. She signed documents she couldn't read because people like her never expect to be lied to by men in suits." Rosenthal rose from his seat, red-faced. "Objection." "Overruled," the judge barked, eyes still on Kian. Kian nodded once, then kept going. "I didn't do this because I thought I could win. I did this because no one else would. Because justice is supposed to mean something. And somewhere along the way, It forgot about people like us. His voice cracked, just slightly. But I didn't forget. A long silence followed. The kind that hangs in the air like thunder before a storm. The judge leaned forward, hands folded over the bench. His face was unreadable, stoic, heavy with years of seeing too much. He cleared his throat. In the matter of the state of New York, he said, glancing at the court file, on the charges of grand larceny, conspiracy to defraud, and government contract fraud. Kian closed his eyes. His mother clutched her scarf, not breathing. This court finds the defendant not guilty on all major counts. The courtroom remained frozen for half a second. Then it erupted. Cheers. Gasps. Sobs. A woman in the gallery stood and clapped. Another hugged the stranger next to her. Kian's knees buckled, but he stayed standing. His mother turned and grabbed him, burying her face in his chest. "You saved my life," she whispered, tears soaking into his shirt. Rosenthal shoved his papers into a leather folder and stormed out, face burning, tie crooked, as if the courtroom itself had betrayed him. The judge banged his gavel, but even he couldn't hide the glimmer of something behind his stern expression. Respect, maybe, or hope. Kian just stood there, lost in the roar of justice finally spoken out loud. A kid from a group home who had no right to win, but did. And in that moment, the city felt different. Like maybe, just maybe, justice was waking up again. The morning after the trial, the city awoke to a headline so unbelievable it stopped traffic at intersections and turned subway cars into silent reading rooms. 12-year-old boy defends mom in $10 million fraud case and wins. Kian's name was suddenly on every channel, every podcast, every breakfast table. The courtroom sketch of him, standing in his oversized suit, one shoe slightly untied, his fist raised with trembling conviction, was already going viral. But while the world buzzed, Kian stayed quiet. Across town, in a modest nursing home, the retired city clerk who had once feared for his life turned on the news. Seeing Kian on screen did something to him. Maybe it was the boy's courage. Maybe it was guilt. Either way, he picked up the phone and made a call to a state investigator. No names. Just a statement. Look into the affordable housing redevelopment files, 2009 through 2015. Start with Building C. By the end of the week, the fuse was lit. Within days, a citywide corruption ring unraveled. Investigators raided offices, seized records, and unearthed layers of fraud. Millions of dollars had been funneled out by corrupt city officials, developers, and yes, Assistant District Attorney Rosenthal. The man who once sneered in the courtroom, who laughed at Kian's objections, now stood red-faced at a press podium, stammering through his resignation speech. "I regret any oversight that may have occurred under my administration," he muttered, before disappearing behind closed doors. Meanwhile, Kian couldn't take 5 steps in public without someone recognizing him. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Offers came pouring in. Interviews, scholarships, book deals. But Kian turned them all down. His answer was the same every time. "I didn't do it for all that." Instead, one quiet Saturday afternoon, Kian walked into a used bookstore. It smelled of old paper, floor polish, and forgotten dreams. He wandered through the dusty aisles until he found the legal section. His fingers paused on a thick, weathered book with a faded navy blue cover. The Art of Cross-Examination. He smiled, blew off the dust, and took it to the counter. $3, the old clerk said. Kian handed over a crumpled 5 and said, "Keep the change." He didn't need to prove anything anymore. The world had already seen what he could do. But there was something about holding that book in his hands. It felt like a promise. Not of fame, not of power, but of purpose. Outside, the sun was low, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. Kian waited at the bus stop, his backpack slung over one shoulder, the book tucked under his arm. His mother stood beside him, no longer wearing the anxiety that had once weighed her down. Her eyes were brighter, her posture straighter. She gently squeezed Kian's hand. "You okay?" she asked. Kian looked up at her, then out at the courthouse, where it all began and nearly ended. "I wasn't trying to be a hero," he said quietly, as the city bus rolled around the corner. "I was just trying to go home." The bus doors opened with a soft sigh. Together, they stepped on board. No cameras, no crowds, just a mother, a son, and the weight of a battle won. Not for glory, but for love. As the doors closed behind them, Kian glanced one last time at the courthouse steps. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just held the book a little tighter. The boy who beat the system was on his way home.